Good morning friends and welcome to this lecture on Flannery O'Connor, the American short story writer who lived between 1925 and 1964. We are soon going to start with her Good Country People. So, she was born in Savannah, Georgia. She was the only child of Regina Klein and Edward Francis O'Connor. Edward O'Connor owned and operated the Dixie Realty Company as well as its extension, the Dixie Construction Company. Young Flannery traveled from Savannah to other parts of the that part of United States to stay at her mother's ancestral home each summer. When in 1937 Edward O'Connor developed disseminated lupus, a kind of disease, the family moved to Milledgeville permanently. That is the place which they would often spend their summers in. In 1941, her father died and she attended Peabody High School and graduated from Georgia State College for Women in 1945. In college, she developed a passion for reading and writing. She was also interested in drawing and cartooning, most of which were satires of college life. She later attended School for Writers, headed by Paul Angle at Iowa University, where her writing career truly began. Here, she received a scholarship in journalism and took up courses in literature, advanced drawing, American political cartooning, magazine writing, and advertising. In 1946, while still a student, her first story, The Geranium, was published in Accent magazine. In 1947, she received her master's in fine arts from the University of Iowa. Later, she garnered a recommendation for a place at Yedo Writers Colony in Saratoga Springs, New York, where she lived until the spring of 1949. Here she became part of a group of 15 artists, including poet Robert Lowell and writer Malcolm Cowley. From 1949 to 50, Connor worked on her first novel, Wise Blood, living briefly in New York City and then moving to Connecticut to live with the Robert Fitzgerald family, where in December of 1950, Flannery O'Connor developed the same disease her father had, disseminated lupus. In 1951, she and her mother moved back to a dairy farm called Andalusia, which was located 5 miles outside of Milledgeville. Her relationship with her mother inspired her writing, and her mother, Regina, understood that she provided some characteristics of the farm women of her daughter's story. Despite the serious physical symptoms of her illness, O'Connor remained mentally active and began working on the stories. She published her story collection in A Good Man is Hard to Find and Other Stories in 1955 and The Violent Bear It Away, her second novel, in 1960. In 1963, her health condition became worse and she began to experience prolonged periods of weakness coupled with increasingly frequent fainting spells. However, she wrote and revised the stories that would later appear in her last collection, Everything That Rises Must Converge. In February 1964, she underwent a surgery to remove the tumor which was believed to be the cause of her severe anemia. The surgery aggravated her lupus and she fell severely ill. Even at that point, O'Connor worked diligently to complete 3 more stories for her final collection, Revelation, Judgment Day, and Parker's Beach. She died in 1964 in Georgia. She has received O. Henry Awards for several of her short stories, particularly The Life You Save May Be Your Own, A Circle in the Fire, Green Leaf, Everything That Rises Must Converge, and Revelation. Coming to her milieu, O'Connor's persistent passion for order places her position central to the Southern literary tradition. The leading literary spokesman for the South have shared the discomfort that they experienced in a modern, mechanized, scientifically oriented world. All artists felt a hunger for meaning, a need for a structure, and a rage for order in existence. They supported a southern way of life as opposed to what may be called the American or prevailing way. The common themes that appeared in the southern literature are slavery, the American Civil War, Reconstruction, the conservative culture in the South, significance of family, religion and community in one's personal and social life, South's troubled history and racial issues. The use of southern dialect also continually appeared in the southern literature. The southerners tended to impose a desire for a social structure that reflects modern principles. O'Connor hailed from an Irish Catholic family. Being a southerner and a Catholic contributed to her writing, and she deeply identified with southern fundamentalism. According to her, a Catholic novelist will not see human beings as inherently good or evil, but will see them rather as incomplete. Christ and devil become the centers of good and evil. In O'Connor's fiction, we see a preoccupation with the Christ figure that is scarcely equaled by her contemporaries. Her vision of a southern Catholic writer is brought about in detail in essays such as The Catholic Novelist and The Protestant South, published in 1963, and The Church and the Fiction Writer. Coming to her writing style, it has been compared to that of Nathaniel Hawthorne and Emily Dickinson. Being a southern writer, most of O'Connor's characters was thought to be a little off kilter. Okay, and as we have seen while we were talking about short stories, she is also a master of the macabre and the grotesque. In her essay, Some Aspects of the Grotesque in Southern Fiction, which was published in 1960, he says, in these grotesque works, we find that the writer has made alive some experience which we are not accustomed to observe every day, or which the ordinary man may never experience in his ordinary life. The connections which a reader would expect in the customary kind of realist writing seems to be ignored. So, these are the skips and gaps. Grotesque characters may be amusing, but that is not their primary function. They see meaning beyond the visible. The characters have an inner coherence. So, all these things you should keep in mind when we discuss the Good Country People. If not, the characters have an inner coherence, if not always a coherence to their social framework. These are important points to remember, and also remember their fictional qualities lean away from typical social patterns towards mystery and the unexpected, which is so important in Good Country People, to understand in Good Country People. Okay, so her major works include Wise Blood and The Violin Bear It Away. It is these are two novels. Then she has published two short story collections, A Good Man is Hard to Find and Other Stories, and Everything That Rises Must Converge. And then these and other writings have been published as The Complete Short Stories. Connor's collected letters, The Habit of Being, which was published in 1979, gave a wider understanding about the author and her works. Another work, Mystery and Manners, Occasional Prose, includes essays and other writings that contribute to an ongoing dialogue about art and religion, and the collected works include novels. The collected works, which was published in 1988, it includes novels and stories along with representative letters and essays and a few previously unpublished stories published in the Library of America edition. Talking about the Geranium, which was published in 1947, this was her first professional publication. It is the title and the first story of a Master of Fine Arts thesis, the Geranium collection of short stories. That is what her thesis was called. The story deals with old Dudley's attitude towards race and illustrates the ways the old southern white man can both refuse to be helped by a strange black man next door but at the same time go fishing with a black man in the south, he feels comfortable as a friend. O'Connor suggests that if the barriers of stereotyping and racial ignorance could be broken down and relationship on a one-to-one basis be encouraged, racism would have had a shorter life in America. Her stories, The Artificial Nigger and Judgment Day, also deal with the theme of racial tensions. In Wise Blood 1952, this is her first novel that was published by Harcourt Brace, the publisher, in 1952. It is dedicated to her mother Regina, and few chapters were reworks from stories that were previously published, namely The Peeler, The Enoch and the Gorilla, and The Train. The novel concerns a returning World War II veteran who, haunted by a lifelong crisis of faith, resolves to form an anti-religious ministry in an eccentric southern town. The themes explored in this novel are freedom, free will, life and death, and the inevitability of belief. And in A Good Man is Hard to Find Another Stories 1955, again published by Harcourt Brace. The title was taken from the blues song A Good Man is Hard to Find, written by Eddie Green and popularized by the singer Bessie Smith in 1927. The subjects of the short stories range from baptism to serial killers to human greed and exploitation. A Good Man is Hard to Find is a comic story with a tragic ending. The story begins with a family traveling from Atlanta to Florida on vacation with a grandmother. It deals with good and evil and the action of grace like the author's other works as well. The subject matter is quite relevant because she keeps on she was preoccupied with this kind of subject matter. The story is told from a third person limited omniscient perspective, and it comments on the difficulty of finding and defining goodness in a confused world, posing interpretive challenges to the readers. In 1954, she also wrote The Displaced Person. It is the last and longest of the 10 stories in the collection. A Good Man is Hard to Find and Other Stories. The story is divided into 3 parts, and within 2 of these number parts are also section breaks. As is customary with Flannery O'Connor, she introduces her characters in the first section. The reader is also introduced to the peacock, and to a peacock who becomes an important character of the story. The story points out the problems of ignorance and the distrust among the people from countries others than their own. The language seems to be a particular concern with the people on the farm and the foreigners. The story is set in the post-World War context where displaced person was an official designation for anyone from Europe or Russia or people who were Jewish in origin. So, these were the refugees or the displaced people. There are several references and allusions to the war and the concentration camps. Several of these involve piles of bodies which are the ultimate displaced body. The setting of this story is closely associated with Andalusia, that was O'Connor's farm. A Circle in the Fire appeared in Canyon Review in 1954 and Prize Stories 1955. It takes place on a Georgia farm and involves outsiders who arrive mysteriously and disrupt the usually uneventful farm life. O'Connor employs symbolism and literary and biblical allusions in the story. The story's title and final scene is taken from the book of Daniel from the Bible, in which the tyrannical king of Babylon, Nebuchadnezzar, throws 3 Jewish boys into a fiery furnace. And then coming to Good Country People, that is our story. At the center of this story is Joy, also Halga, and she is a 32-year-old woman. She has a PhD and she also has an artificial leg. and her encounter with a mysterious stranger. So, this is a common theme in most of her works, a mysterious stranger or group of people arriving on the scene and disrupting the relative calm of the place, of any place. And then it deals with the different possibilities for understanding how people negotiate with the world and interpret each other's actions. She also depicts the racial or radical conflicts between the worldview of the unsophisticated farm people and the university formed intellectuals who in their pride dismiss the possibility of grace and blind themselves to the ways of the world. Her story Everything That Rises Must Converge was published in 1965 and it contains an introduction by Robert Fitzgerald. The title expresses her constant concern with man's slow participation in redemption. The title is taken from the writings of a Jesuit priest, Pierre Teilhard, the Chardon's works, which she had been reading since early 1961 and whose ideas are highly relevant to the particular meaning of her sacramental view. The title story that appeared in New World Writing in 1961 won the O. Henry Memorial Award. The story had an O. Henry twist, and this is a typical term used to denote an unexpected conclusion or climax, the way it is done in O. Henry's stories. It is set during the beginning of the civil rights movement when the South was still segregated, and it is told again from a third person's point of view. The story highlights longing for love, the struggle between races, a region divided between old and new, and a mother and son who even in their seeming differences care for each other. It has several interrelated themes: the fallen nature of the modern world, the struggle for social class and status, morals, morality and moral responsibility, racism in the South, impact of integration in the South, intellectualism and elitism, knowledge and ignorance, manipulation of others, self-deception and self-understanding, thinking and acting, the ideal and the real, and the appearance and the reality. Letters of Flannery O'Connor, which is The Habit of Being, which was published in 1979 and edited by her friend Sally Fitzgerald. The title of the collection comes from Fitzgerald's sense that O'Connor deliberately cultivated a habit of art of living in the world, which Fitzgerald terms as a habit of being. The volume won the National Book Critics Circle Special Award in 1979. Talking about Revelations in 1964, it is the last story to appear separately before O'Connor's death in 1964, the same year. It was published in the spring issue of the Seventy Review. At the center of the story is Ruby Turpin, an overweight middle class white woman obsessed with class consciousness and racial relations. She forms O'Connor's strong social commentary and embodies a bigoted Southern culture consumed by notions of or prefix notions of races and class. The story provides a window into her personality, her relationships, views about O'Connor's works, and her views on topics such as literature, literary analysis, aesthetics, politics, illnesses, spirituality, and most importantly, the Catholic Church. So, many people have seen this work as autobiography, or it has a strong autobiographical references, and then it can also be seen as a kind of literary criticism and opinion pieces. So, what is her legacy? Her legacy is embodied in her works of fiction, essays, reviews and letters. In 1946, the library staff at the Ina Dillard Russell Library of Georgia College and University established a Flannery O'Connor collection. It holds more than 6,000 manuscripts and 700 books from the author's personal library, making it one of the premier collection of the author's works. The Flannery O'Connor and Lucia Foundation Incorporated was established in 2001 to promote interest in the study of the author, and Wise Blood was made into a movie in 1979. The movie was directed by John Huston. I would like you to look at this slide of references. Connie and Kirk, Critical Companion to Flannery O'Connor, published in 2014, and Blake Hobbies and Patricia Grant's Students' Encyclopedia of Great American Writers, and it includes Flannery O'Connor. Further readings: American Women Writers, Facts on File by Carol Codd, Miles Orwell's Flannery O'Connor, an introduction, and then American it should be women writers, not women writers, women writers, edited by Larry Champion. So, thank you very much, and for our next class we will start with Good Country People.